Hi, this is the Global Digest think tank group, and you are our guest today. You are more a professor, or you are now retired, or what's your
No,
status?
no, I'm not retired. No, I'm not retired yet. No,
Okay,
I'm a professor at the University of Sao Paulo. I'm originally I'm European, right? I'm from Germany originally. I passed through the UK. I was there for 15 years, and I've been in Brazil now for 19 years. I'm German. I'm a German citizen, but I'm Brazilian. My family is Brazilian. My wife, my kids, my work. So, but I'm German. I'm a German citizen.
I see.
I just ended up here by through my wife.
I see. Your wife is Brazilian.
Yes, yes. I speak German, English, and Portuguese. Spanish I understand, but my spoken Spanish is very basic. I understand it all right, but I don't speak very well. I can speak about Latin America, yeah.
I see. What's exactly current situation EU Latin America cooperation?
Um, I think that very much depends on what part of Latin America you're talking about. So, um, there's a lot going on at the moment. Obviously, the EU Mercosur trade deal is gone into effect, albeit provisionally. So that's going now, and that's working now. The EU is also doing quite a lot of sort of bilateral work with Brazil on, for instance, on digitalization, on fake news, on uh, all kinds of things to do with technology. And they're doing that with quite a few countries, but Brazil is one where they've just signed the sort of a digital cooperation pact. Um, uh, Other than that, it's a bit how can I put it? Hit and miss because there's been there are quite a few sort of political shifts in Latin America at the moment. We have a lot of we're having a lot of elections in Latin America this year, that have generally gone to the right. So we have a lot more governments that are right wing or extreme right wing. But all of those elections have been, or most of those elections have been really, really close. So there's a sort of deep political polarization in Latin America, which generally, and some in some countries more than others. So you have Brazil, where we have elections in October, which is deeply polarized. You can see it in Peru. You've seen it in Colombia. You can see it in Argentina. Um, and obviously, that's without even talking about Central America, where we have similar dynamics. But it's so we have a deeply polarized political environment in the region,
Uh,
and that has made it that's made it quite difficult for the EU to do anything coherent, because depending on the elections and election results, sort of foreign policy of countries here sort of changes, often quite dramatically, and that's made it difficult for the EU.
right. So, Brazil election, you can vote it or you cannot vote.
No, I can't vote. I will. I'm applying for Brazilian citizenship, but it will not come through in time for the elections in October.
This, this year you cannot vote. Probably your wife can vote, right?
My wife, yeah, yeah, well, yeah, yeah. In Brazil, you have to vote. It's voting is compulsory, so she has to vote.
Brazilian President Lula, he can be re-elected, or how do
He
you?
can. he can be re-elected, and he is running to be as a candidate at the moment. He's slightly ahead in the opinion polls of his nearest rivals, both in the first round and in the runoff. Um, but it's close, so I wouldn't put a lot of money on it. It can still go. I think it can still go either way. Um, to be honest with you, in a practical sense, I don't think whoever wins the presidential election will change much, certainly in the short term, with regards to China. Um, because the left in Brazil, of which Lula is part, is more China friendly, shall we say. They're more sympathetic to China rhetorically, whereas the right is more critical of China in at least publicly. However, even if we had a right-wing president, I don't see big changes towards China because China is too important in terms of trade. So you cannot. I mean, it's Brazil's biggest trading partner by quite a margin these days.
Right.
So Brazil can't really afford to upset China, and so I don't see um, the posture, the Brazilian posture towards China, I don't see changing dramatically after the elections, whoever wins it, because the economic context will remain the same, broadly speaking, and they cannot afford to change that. I mean, the thing I always say. When people expect sort of wild changes, depending on election, Brazilian presidents and in fact Brazilian political systems rise and fall with the country's economic performance, right? So the military dictatorship that came in 1964 came after an economic crisis. The military dictatorship finished in 1985 in the middle of an economic crisis. We had in the 90s we had the impeachment of Fernando Collor as president in the middle of an economic crisis. In 2000 and when was it? 2016. Dilma was impeached after an economic crisis. So Brazilian presidents they have to be well evaluated economically, otherwise they lose power. And because of that, no one is really prepared in a practical sense to take on China.
So it means the Brazil-China trading is very crucial, and immediately no country, no region can replace, right? Europe cannot replace, and US cannot replace immediately US,
No,
Brazil,
not in the short term.
China trading.
Not in the short term, no.
Brazil-China trading will remain for more decades, probably. You cannot be replaced it, right?
I mean, if you obviously it could, but it would take a long time to change that balance. I mean, to give you an idea, we're now, I think, bilateral trade between the two countries has gone up to something like $170 billion a year, which is, if I'm not mistaken, and you might want to check that, I think that is now something like double the amount of trade that Brazil has with the United States. So I mean, even if a government, even if a president or a government wanted to change Brazil's relationship with China, it would take a long time, even if they did try it. There's another issue here, which is, um, as I said at the beginning, I think we Brazil is a deeply polarized country politically. Um, so you have two blocks um, where most of the followers are quite loyal. So they'll vote for the left or they'll vote for the right, whatever. Then you have which seems to me is a diminishing part of the electorate in the middle that sort of can go either way. But that's a smaller part than it used to be. So you kind of try and fight over that smaller and diminishing part of the electorate, and you do that by basically saying, look, the economy is doing well and you're getting better, your life is getting better, and you have to make people believe that that their life is getting better. Um, I think the problem that Lula has, apart from the fact that we'll see how the economy will go in the next couple of months, is that he's been in power. This will be his. If he wins, it'll be his fourth term, and he's 80 years old. So he has what we actually call it in Brazil. We call it a Biden problem, right? He has a Biden problem in the sense that he
Very
is the known face who's very old, and you can see it. It's visible. He's not as energetic. He is, by far Brazil's best campaigner over many, 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 many years, decades. But he's lacking a certain amount of energy because he's 80 years old. Um, and in a campaign, I think that might be a problem. I'm not sure it'll be enough to make him lose the election, but it could be a problem.
right. Because of health issue problem for traveling, and many old president cannot sit in the office full time. So
No,
the
no.
Lula government will be, uh, consolidated election again and again. I don't know European strategy in Brazil or Latin America. They want to emphasize in which area or how much European can persuade Latin America, especially Brazil, to be aligned in line with European or Western countries. Do you see any geopolitical leverage or balancing by European leader?
Um, I think that very much depends on which country we're talking about. So if we're talking about Colombia or Mexico or Honduras, like Central America, their their leverage or Europe's leverage over those countries is really small because they depend on the United States for trade, for military and security support, for all kinds of things, right? There is a dependency there, which um, Europe will not be able to break. It will not be able to get in. Brazil is slightly different because it has I would say, a more ambivalent relationship with the United States. It's much bigger, so it has a kind of, it is a regional power in South America. It's by far the biggest and most dominant country. Um, So that gives it certain amounts of freedom that for instance, a Colombia simply doesn't have, and cannot have. However, um, I would be, or no, I am skeptical about Europe's chances of increased influence in the long term, for the simple reason that I don't see Europe having a particularly coherent strategy on this. Europe is deeply divided. So within the European Union, you have deep political divisions. You have a sort of very much more pro-American bloc. You have a very ambivalent kind of posture towards China. On the one hand, yeah, we'd like to stand up to them more. On the other hand, well, they're an important partner for us, and we don't really want to upset that either. And I don't see within the European Union a sort of clear, coherent idea of what they actually want in Latin America. I don't. So if I were to ask a senior EU official in Brazil, right, what is the EU's objective for Latin America in 2 sentences? I don't think they could give it to me. I don't, and that makes it difficult. So the EU um, is trying, I think, quite hard to deepen ties with Latin America. So the EU Mercosur trade deal is an example of that. There was a concerted push to get that signed and implemented. The EU is doing a lot of work with Brazil on energy security, energy independence, and all that kind of stuff. But those, I don't, and, and they might criticize me for it, and they might say that I'm wrong, but I don't see how that fits into an overarching objective and strategy. So I always say to my students, can you give me the purpose of an international organization in 2 sentences? And and if you can, then it's probably doing well. And if you can't, then the organization has a problem. And NATO in the Cold War was, keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and Germans down. That was NATO in a sentence. Okay. What is it now? I don't know. And that's the same. And I think that's the same with the European Union. I do not know what the European Union seeks to achieve, what its overall sort of objectives are, strategic objectives are, and that is reflected in the way it conducts itself in Latin America, which I think is very sort of
Right.
hit and miss and whack-a-mole, right?
Yes, it seems EU will be unlikely to persuade or influence any time in Latin America, although European maybe, I mean, they will consider Latin America, South America more European look like or European speaker. Even there are a lot of German speaker in Brazil, and also Italian speaker. Many European, I mean, descent in South America, but it
Mm.
doesn't matter in this geopolitics. It seems like that Europe cannot win Latin America, something like that. Even Spain cannot influence Latin America because most Spanish speaker countries, because of
Um,
language, Spanish speaker language,
mm.
just for language, even it's not any advantage to geopolitical influence in Latin America through Spain, Europe.
No, I don't think so, because the the colonial legacy here is still really strong. So it actually my sense is that it often works against Spain, for instance,
Uh,
is when Spain tries to do something in the region, and they say, well, because you're no longer telling us what to do, right? We decide what we do. So that is quite strong still. That sort of sense that the Europeans in particular, and the Spain and Portugal specifically, they no longer run this place, right? We do. So in that respect, the influence is quite limited. Um, I think, and that's to do as well with the way that trade flows have changed. So, for a lot of Latin American countries, the most important trade partner nowadays is not Europe, it's China. Um, and so, if you look at China is constructing an entire major port on the Peruvian Pacific coast, right? It's a Chinese port. So what are Spain going to say to Peru? What are the European Union going to say to Peru? Because the idea is, who opens up the gateway for Peru to the Pacific and to the world is China. It's not the EU.
I
And at the end of the day, the money talks. So I think the major geopolitical disputes in the region will be between the United States and China, not Europe.
see. Europe influence unlikely in many cases because Europe is, they are reaping their past doing very bad history of colonization around the world in Latin America,
Mhm.
Africa, Asia. A lot of European country, we can say almost all of European countries are colonizer, British
Mm.
colonizer, French colonizer, German, Spanish colonizer, Portuguese, even small countries, Netherlands also colonizer, Belgium also. Everybody, Italy, everybody experience with colonizing around the world. So European is reaping the past doing that will be very difficult to convince, influence geopolitical with the historical context. So Europe might be nowadays reaping, and Europe is they are reaping their own what they have done in the past that this look
Yeah, I
like
think.
that this look like in Latin America they are not winning compared to Europe. US might be better positioned to win South America and Latin America, isn't it?
Well, I mean, possibly, and I mean, look at I mean, if you're a South American country, I mean, we now have some governments that have just taken power in Peru, in Colombia, in Argentina, who are in Honduras, who are very well disposed to the United States, politically speaking, ideologically, to this current U.S. government in particular. Um, so I think naturally they'll be more open to U.S. influence. Um, there is another thing which I think is sort of practical, which is what the United States did in Venezuela at the start of the year, where they
Right,
basically just took out, right? They took out a leader, and of course, if you're a leader in South America, um, you look at that and you think, okay, well, they've done it to Venezuela. If they do it to Venezuela, they can do it to me potentially. Okay, and of course that will influence your behavior. There's no doubt about that. Whether you sort of do it consciously or subconsciously, well, they just went in and took out a leader and left. Um, so what does that mean for me as a leader? It's natural. I think those are two things. So the political composition of the region is more Trump friendly, okay, and of course the actions of the United States have changed the behavior of governments. There is a third point, which I think is more to do with Europe's weakness. Um, I mean, if I was an EU policymaker, I would sort of position myself as a more dependable um, as a more dependable partner than the United States, because you never quite know what Trump is going to do from one day to the next. And you can sort of say to them, so look, we are a big open market economy, but we stick to our agreements. Okay, we don't rip them up. We won't come in and take your leaders away, whatever. Which I think is in many ways what China is doing. I mean, China is basically saying to the region, so look, you might not like our politics, you might not like our policy, you might not like how we treat minorities or whatever, but you can rely on us, you can depend on us, right? When we make an agreement, we stick to it. Uh, and so I think there would be a window there for Europe to sort of make that pitch, but they're not doing it, in my view, and that leaves them in a strategically in a weak position as far as I'm concerned.
Right, right. So, in terms of military power, I think U.S. is still control South America, Latin America. U.S. power is still influence, we can say. Latin America countries or South American countries cannot play with U.S. in this military power. They have to be aligned with U.S. or otherwise they have to face U.S. punishment, kind of Venezuela case. But U.S. may
Mm,
be not able to do in economic trading like China, maybe Chinese case that they can do. And but China may not easy to influence in terms of military power in
mm.
Latin America or South America compared to US, right? US will be still military power domain or
Yeah,
influence in South America. I don't know Brazil military power. How's that
I
big?
mean, I think certainly in the north of the region, so Central America, Colombia, obviously now Venezuela, at the moment. Um, I think, yeah, the influence of U.S. military power is evident. It's obvious. I mean, the U.S. has a big military base in Honduras. It has the Colombian military. Essentially depends on the United States in military terms, in technological terms, and sort of the furnishment of goods, of military hardware, and so on. Um, I think that's slightly different for a country like Brazil, which has a big its own defense complex, defense industrial complex. Um, so there are differences between countries, but of course, it's easier for the United States to project military power into Latin America than it is for China, simply because of distances involved, right? And of course, and as I said, I mean, we will see a battle. It might not be a physical battle, but a sort of a battle, but for influence between China and the United States in the region. There's no doubt, and I think China's lost an ally in Venezuela, because it's essentially Venezuelan foreign policy is now being run by by Marco Rubio. Um, and they will not want to lose any others. I think that's that's obvious. What they do have as an advantage over the United States is not necessarily military; it is financial in the sense that they're prepared to invest billions into the economy of those countries, as they have done, in Peru, for instance, with that port. And they are planning to build a railroad from the Pacific coast to the Atlantic coast in South America and all that kind of stuff. So that's China's big leverage, and I think the battle over the next few years will be who who wins that who wins that battle of influence. What talks louder. Um, I'm not sure how it's going to go, but
Right.
I don't think. I mean, if you're a Latin American leader and you look at the United States and the Middle East, for instance, so I mean, you must be slightly worried about what U.S. intervention here would mean, not just for your country, but for the region as a whole.
Right. So Venezuela cases, well, you can say significantly, Venezuela cases, I mean, Venezuela cannot play with U.S. in terms of military power. Otherwise, I mean, U.S. can knock down anytime. So that U.S. is showing Venezuela, and I don't know how uh, Lula Lula see Venezuela case. I don't know how Brazil capacity, military capacity, they can able to stand up against US, or they have to cooperate with US in case of any tension in the region, or Brazil will prevent any US influence or military uh, influence similar to Venezuela case in other South America country. Any
Do,
capacity.
would Brazil have the capacity to make life more difficult for the United States in a political sense? Yes. Militarily, no, I don't see it. The thing is, the Brazilian governments tend to sort of walk a very fine line here. On the one hand, standing up to the United States in defense of national sovereignty plays very well electorally. Okay, so for instance, the sort of imposition of tariffs on Brazil by Trump, with the sort of tacit support of the Bolsonaro family, that played very well for Lula because Lula could present himself as the defender of Brazilian sovereignty, and that plays very very well here. Um, but do they want to enter into a sort of prolonged open conflict with the United States? No, they don't want to do that. And I don't think any Brazilian government would want to do that, because it would just be too disruptive. At the end of the day, Brazilian foreign policy and the Brazilian foreign policy establishment wants stability. They want, yeah, they want things to be working. So they don't want to prolong conflict with the United States, be it economically and obviously not militarily. Even though in the short term, certainly on for government of the left, standing up to the United States works quite well politically.
See, so military Brazil cannot challenge US.